Hi, this is Carlin from Share Partners. Today I am doing another Zoom interview, even though some people are starting to head back towards the office and maybe towards either their new normal or their old normal. I'm still one of the people who's taking their time, making it the transition from the home office into the physical office, and a really great person to talk to about that from an operational standpoint and organizational standpoint is Kristyn Berger from Berger HR Solutions, who is my guest today. She and I have been talking really regularly, but since we've known each other for a little over a year now, I think, and we've been talking really regularly through this entire quarantine process, and she's had amazing insights in regard to the HR implications and the kind of what you do from an organizational excellence standpoint, because that's her expertise as a consultant and owner of a consultancy who focuses on helping small to mid-sized businesses with their HR functions. So I wanted to start, Kristyn, first of all, by asking you, there's we can get into what the long-term implications are and more concrete changes that some organizations might be making as a result of not really just the pandemic, but this extended work from home experiment, if you will. But what are some of the things on the more short term as we're sort of on the cusp of phase one, phase two, from a jurisdiction standpoint, and then some companies also making the decision to delay their strategy into September or the new year, and some may be still kind of figuring out, we're still in sort of that research and development phase, as you and I have called it in the past, in terms of what the best practices are. How are you guiding your clients through the short term and what the immediate next steps should be?
Sure. So, as you said, at Berger HR Solutions, we work with small and mid-sized business owners. So, as you can imagine, we've been talking about COVID-19 quite a bit. And I think the interesting thing is that it really does impact, depending on the size of the business, the industry, it's impacted all of our clients a little bit differently. So it's kind of interesting to think about it through, that lens of what's right for one company isn't necessarily right for another. So I think now that we're starting to see things open up, the state of Maryland just this past Friday moved to phase 2. I think a lot of people are starting to think about what's next for my business. Everyone kind of had a plan while we had the shelter in place and the quarantine in place, but now that things are starting to open up, there's a lot of decisions to be made. And, I think business owners really need to start, one, with determining what am I permitted to do based on the state that I'm in, the county that I'm in, where, based on the type of business that we are, what are we allowed to do at this point? That's kind of the first step. And then from there, it's really determining based on that, what's going to be best for our particular business. And so I think the best place for business owners to start is to think about, what right now in the short term, what does our office actually need to look like? So, I one of the pieces of advice that we give our clients is just because you can bring people back to the office doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So the best place to start is to kind of ask who fits in. There's several buckets that employees can fit into in terms of returning to the office. There are those that really do need to be in the office to do their job effectively. So I think about, our manufacturers or our service providers that need their employees to be physically in the office to be able to do their job. You think about stylists or restaurant servers or people who run a manufacturing line. They really can't do their job from home.
Right.
So, clearly, if the business is back up and running, those employees are going to return to the office. And there's kind of the next level of employee that is it's nice for them to be in the office or preferable. So I think about a lot of finance employees, for example. It is beneficial for them to be in the office to be able to gather checks, to run payroll. And so it's more of a preferred, they can work remotely, but not necessarily do they have to be there. There's also the employees that I've seen that fit into the really don't need to be in the office, but prefer to work for the office for their own personal reasons. So,
I was going to ask you about that. What about the people who want to come back because they're in a micro unit apartment or, family situation, whatever their home or family situation is?
we're seeing that a lot. People with children at home, dogs at home, like I said, in a small space with someone else that's working from home, or just people who are creatures of habit and really enjoy being in their office space. That's where they can focus and work best. You have those individuals too. And then of course you have kind of the next level of employee, who are the employees who are like, I can do my job just fine from home and actually prefer to work remotely. So, as a business owner, I think the best way to determine where employees fall is, one, to go through their job duties and determine, based on our jobs, which jobs do we need back in the office versus which jobs may have the option to return or continue working from home. And another best practice that I've seen among several clients is reaching out and surveying employees, because it's easy to term the people who absolutely must be in the office or there's really no need to be in the office. Those people in that in between, like, might prefer. You're not going to know unless you ask them. And
right.
I think that's one of the things. So many people are focused on the operations aspects of COVID-19 and making sure the business stays sustainable. It's easy to forget that there's humans behind these decisions. And I think involving employees really says a lot about your company culture. I don't know about you, Carlin, but I would be appreciative of someone reaching out to me and saying, look, Kristyn, you can return to the office, but if you'd prefer, to work in the office or prefer to work at home, it's up to you at this point. What's your comfort level?
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to be asked. They just like to be asked.
Yeah, and people surprise you. Like I said, there might be people that you think want to work remotely that say, no, like, I want to come back to the office tomorrow. And others that you think might be chomping at the bit to come back to the office, that they say, actually, I'd much prefer to continue working from home for right now. And so I think that's something, it's good to kind of determine where everyone falls, both from a business perspective, what do you need, but then what does the employee need, and then come up with your game plan for who's coming back when.
Right. So that helps people kind of get back into, as we're phasing in from this quarantine, what are you telling them in terms of, I know I've spoken to a lot of businesses who we were talking to about their next steps in terms of new spaces, and a lot of those requirements have been put on hold because they want to wait and see, even as we're kind of coming into this recovery phase from the quarantine and the restrictions are lifted. There are a lot of organizations that want to wait this out until the end of this coming winter to make sure that we're not going to be put on some sort of lockdown again, and that their business is going to survive the full year of this. And hopefully by then, there'll be a vaccine. And so is anyone asking you for guidance in terms of that, if we have to do this again, what they might do differently, or is there anything that you would recommend in terms of a lesson learned?
So, I think to just to kind of take a step in between, I think for the people who are going back, kind of the lesson learned is you shouldn't go back willy-nilly.
Right.
Term, but it's important, if you decide that you are going to go back to the office, or a part of your workforce is going to go back to the office between now and the end of the year, that there are still a lot of concerns out there that need to be addressed. So, once you determine what your plan is, I think it's really important that employers do kind of two things, that operationally they have some things buttoned up. So, for example, having a clear operations plan around how are we operating while we're in various phases of returning. Also having their expectations of employees, because again, every office is going to look a little bit different, but if you're expecting employees to wear masks in the office, reiterating things that everyone was doing even pre-quarantine, like avoiding shaking hands and using social distancing. So having that in writing, I think, is very important. I also think having a couple other operational type things in place, like many people have been thinking about, are we going to take the temperatures of employees coming to the office? Are we going to have them complete a screening questionnaire? I have my own thoughts on that. I personally think, in some cases taking temperatures is actually a really great idea, especially for medical offices that have the equipment and the ability to do it. A lot of our clients that we've been talking to, I think the risk is not necessarily worth the reward. There's some ADA considerations if you're taking temperatures, also some logistical challenges. So what I recommend people putting in place is, one, considering what approach are you taking, but then having some kind of format so that when people start returning to the office, both employees and visitors, that you have a screening mechanism. And so, a plan, a screening mechanism for people coming back into the office to make sure that they're COVID symptom free, thinking about what are you going to do, even though people come back to the office, that doesn't mean that COVID is gone. And so, it's having a plan. What happens if Carlin calls in and says that she's tested positive for COVID-19? What's our response? How do we handle her leave? Just thinking through those things, more of the paperwork and the processes. But then I think, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, the other thing to consider is the physical space. So, there's a lot of things I think that we took for granted prior to COVID-19, like shared food in the kitchen, probably not a good idea anymore. Having people sitting in cubes with low walls right next to each other, probably not something that you want to have happen, at least in these next couple months. So really thinking through, is our office physically prepared? If we're requiring masks, are we providing them? Do we have antibacterial, do we have soaps? Do we have wipes? Are we giving people the tools that they need to be safe in the office? And thinking through those considerations too. So, have you seen, kind of in the short term anyway, anything like in the office in terms of prepping in a physical way?
Yeah, we've seen, including in our own office, but also with a lot of our clients and other businesses, we've seen a lot of businesses be able to pivot really quickly in terms of implementing a place for people to sort of land a really great sort of remix for the reception area, because I think it was sort of a trend for a while that people weren't really staffing reception desks with someone anymore. And so you walk into a lot of offices before this and it was sort of a dead zone. You peek your head around the corner and see if anyone's there. Or they staff it with someone part-time. And so having that area now is sort of a landing spot. I think one person suggested it could be sort of like the new mudroom. But that's actually not a bad idea, because it gives you somewhere where people can come in, they can sort of sanitize from entering the building and touching different doorknobs and everything. They can have, if you're doing, a lot of people are doing AB or even ABC scheduling for as part of the return to work. So in addition to, what you were talking about with having people come back in different phases, maybe like month over month, for example. But then also on top of that, they're not necessarily coming back on the same days. And they have a like an AB schedule system. And so in that case, oftentimes they're sharing desk space or office space, maybe to give people more privacy and more physical barriers. And so having a locker system right there, that's something that you can easily get from a furniture vendor for the space you're currently in. Having masks and gloves available in that reception area. So that's one thing that we've seen offices be able to do and pivot to quickly. Another thing is having directional signage. You can get stickers or signs created by a vendor very easily to show people a flow of traffic around your office, to minimize how much people are physically passing each other in close quarters, for example, in a hallway. And then a lot of furniture vendors have an option for those open cubes and those collaborative spaces to add partitions that are already built for those workstations that create more height. And they have nice, beautiful, clear ones. We've got them in our office that you get that height and you get that protection, but you can still see and you can still access natural light. Because that's one thing, there are a couple things where I think that companies have wanted to be very reactive in certain phases of this, just like we've all gone through different phases of how we want to kind of come out of this or how we're going through this. Some have ebbed and flowed with how much they want to change on the other side of this. And it's important to remember that some of the things that we've seen in office spaces are there for a good reason. One, kind of having more glass and some of the more open areas. Natural light's extremely important in human beings. So if you're going to have people back in the office, putting up a bunch of hard walls and limiting the amount of access to natural light in the space isn't really healthy for people. And the other thing is people do, to your point, there are people who miss the collaboration. And there was a big debate happening for years, frankly, before this, where we had gone to that open office concept and it was all about collaboration, but then people started to really complain about sort of the nuisance of the noise and distractions and being interrupted easily, and kind of, earphones became the new doors.
Yes. and I've actually assisted clients with those kinds of concerns. Like, we like our open air office, but people feel distracted, or if they're trying to focus on work, and their coworkers are having a conversation right next to them, it's distracting. So I think, it's been an issue prior to COVID-19.
Right, it was an issue prior, and I think you can still have those workstations. Solutions were being suggested and implemented before COVID around still having an open environment, and it also gives you more flexibility in case let's say you want to have a more remote workforce immediately because you think that's what everyone wants, and then maybe a year from now, you pivot again in terms of the percentage of people who are in the office or the way that they're utilizing the office. Furniture can be a great way to have that flexibility. Whether you buy it or there's options to rent it, that's a great way to be able to pivot with your business changes in the physical space. So you can, like I said, you can add height to existing workstations. If people are, one thing that a lot of people are going to have to figure out is, so for example, if I go back to the office tomorrow and I'm working with you on a project and you're never going back to the office again, or you're in the high risk category, and so just because I'm comfortable being back in the physical space and having in-person meetings, you're still not. So whereas meetings we would normally have in person, yours and I'm back in the office now, I'm not at home where I have private space and I can really control my environment. I'm back in the office with a ton of other people and only 2 conference rooms, and at any given moment, one or both could be taken. I still need to have Zoom meetings with you because you can't come meet me in person. And it's going to be like that for you for a year. Let's say you have to maintain that until a vaccine comes out. How am I going to have effective video conferencing with my clients and my partners and my colleagues? You could be my colleague in the office. How am I going to do that from my cube? Right. And so is it is it actually doing more for people's desks, more open, and giving people options to pop into smaller video conferencing rooms and turning some of those private offices into rooms with those capabilities so that people can have those meetings from within the office, and kind of, we have this hybrid workforce, and how do we make sure that the physical environment, can have everything we need from a technological standpoint, because that's going to be a reality. I think that's going to be a little messy for a little while, people figuring out how to accommodate this hybrid workforce, because people have worked remote before, but not like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. I think there's some like physical changes we're going to see in the short term, like in the next several months, the rest of this year. Like, I love your suggestion of having a landing space, because I think right now there's a lot of people who are feeling, again, try to remind business owners, there's humans behind these interactions. And I know going into an office for the first time, whether you're an employee or a visitor, there's just a lot of people that are going to have some concerns. How can you make sure that an office still feels positive, friendly, collaborative, which is why I love like adding glass to cubes or doing things that provides protection without making it feel sterile in the office environment. But I think like that's short term. Long term, and I really want to hear your opinion on this. I have a lot of clients that are saying, even post COVID-19, this is going to change the way we do business. Like, I've had a lot of professional services firms specifically say, we've always been hesitant to remote work. Now that we've been forced into it, we're actually finding that there's a lot of benefits, because one, they're saving on expenses. They're not paying the high electricity bills. They aren't paying for employee parking. There's, a lot of expenses that fall off when you don't have people going into a physical office. From an employer perspective. And I think from an employee perspective, a lot of employees are like, there's a lot of benefits to working from home, and the flexibility is nice. Even if they don't work 5 days a week remotely moving forward, I think there's going to be a lot of employees who say it would be really nice to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. So, that I think, we get that vaccine. COVID-19 is something that, years next year, it could be a year, 2 years, who knows? But it is a thing of the past. I don't think it's necessarily going to, I think there's some businesses that are going to change regardless. So like for those businesses looking to make more long-term changes where it's, our space really no longer suits our needs because we don't need so much space, or we do need this much space, but we want more conference rooms and video rooms and collaborative spaces, and only a small number of hotel offices, and we need lockers, or how, what would you suggest for those that are thinking long-term, they're thinking 2021, 2022, what would you suggest to those employers?
Right. If your changes on an operational level require more dramatic changes in terms of physical footprint or even location, or what you're paying in your rent, or reality is that some people have been impacted in a financial way, and so they need to change sort of their how much they're putting into their real estate expense. So for that, I think that the key, that's something we're going back to that research and development, we're still kind of figuring out what organizations need based on what people need after this whole thing, from a health perspective, from a work-life balance and productivity perspective, and we don't know the answer. So flexibility is key. If it's easier for you to not go through a move, there's ways that someone like me can help you with some sort of renewal in place, but maybe you can give back or get in exchange for some term, get some money to do some construction work in your space. I think if you are going to move into new space, once again, there's spec suites. There's going to be more sublets on the market. So there's some options there in terms of if you're changing your footprint. Either some companies, we've seen both. Some companies are reducing their footprint, either because of how this has impacted their business from a financial standpoint, and the number of people in their workforce, or the number of people they expect to physically have in the office. And then we've also seen people want to expand their space because they want to create that physical distance, or they want to add more options in terms of rooms and ways for people to work. Just like people, I think most people like to have the option to come into the office. They don't want to come in all the time. They like the option to work from home or from the office as needed for their day. And so creating like those landing spaces and more smaller conference rooms, in the Zoom rooms and everything, so having some flexibility in terms of your size and being able to scale, that's really going to come down to the length of term that you have and your options, a couple of years out from now, because you might want to reevaluate in 3 or 5 years instead of in 15 years. So I think flexibility is key, and it really depends. It sounds like a cop-out, but it's really not. Now more than ever, there really is no one-size-fits-all answer. It has to come down to how the business is changing on the level of the conversations they're having with you, and how can we make that work best for them, in terms of not just the physical footprint, what we've mostly been talking about in terms of the configuration of the space, but also site selection. If most people this is changing kind of the way that they're coming into work, how often they're coming into work. Maybe if you were focused in a transit-oriented development, maybe right on top of Metro, for example, maybe you don't need that anymore, and maybe you'd prefer maybe more people, or some people are going to be scared to go on the Metro after this, or any kind of subway system or public transit. People want to drive their cars more, so maybe you need to move to a building where you have free parking, because that gets really expensive. So there's so many things that go into it, and it is very specific to the company, but I think the key is flexibility.
Yes. I think it's an opportunity for business owners and advisors like us to really be a little innovative and think outside of the box. And I think right now there's actually more really good questions and really good answers. And
amen.
It's really like, we don't have, I always tell people I just in the last several months have become a COVID-19 expert.
Yes.
So I have a lot of answers or information, but I certainly don't have all of the answers. And in some cases there really is no, whether it's HR processes or real estate, there's no right, wrong answer. It's more of what's best given the information you have and the kind of business that you are, both from an industry perspective and also a cultural perspective. And I think, it's going to force all of us to be kind of, like I said, open-minded and flexible, and, really thinking about things from a lot of different angles, which is why I love having conversations with people like yourself, because I think, we all look at things through a very different lens, and it's good to kind of get people's opinions from, that have different specialties.
Yeah, I know talking to you turbocharges what I do, because it gives me such a good understanding of the people aspect of, at the end of the day, the real estate is there to serve the people. And so, I really have valued through this whole process of us being quarantined, being able to get insights about what your clients are going through. So this has been great. I'm glad we were able to share a little bit of the conversations that we've been having just between the two of us with people in our networks. And like you said, I think you said it perfectly, there's a lot more really great questions than there are answers. So I think that would merit us doing this again in a couple months, because maybe we'll have answers to some of those questions and we'll have new questions. So
I think, not just every day things change, let alone every month. So I think conversations with fellow professionals, fellow business owners, to everyone out there, I think the more you can talk to people and gather best practices, the better off you're going to be through this. It's, we all have to support each other.
Exactly. It's there's no pressure to pretend that you know all the answers, because everyone knows that this was unprecedented. We've heard it a million times.
It's hard enough just to keep up sometimes, I think, with your own lane, let alone everyone else's lane. So I think the smart and efficient thing to do is to pull from everyone. We're all in it together. So,
well, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Carlin.
I will talk to you soon.